I'm talking about extremism. We'll be talking about radicalisation. I am Britain's most senior Muslim officer, so part of my day job I can't actually divorce from my heritage, my religious background, and it all comes together, and I hope it comes together for good effect. Sometimes it gets me into a little bit of hot bother, and I'll explain what that entails when I go through my talk. But ultimately it's driven by trying to do the best we can to make sure that we keep all of our citizens, irrespective of their backgrounds, absolutely safe, secure and feeling confident, because it's a great nation, it's a united nation, and we want to keep it that way. I'm not a counter-terrorism officer, I'm not a commander of CT. That job was my best friend's, who's Richard, who sat there, so I'm sure he's assessing me, but that's not my job. But my day job has been, for the last 5 years, absolutely involved with people like Richard and his command in making sure that our efforts towards countering terrorism and extremism absolutely work. I'm going to take you, if I may, just on a short journey as to what really grabbed me about this area. I remember being, all of us senior leaders were at a big leadership occasion at Empress State Building in Earl's Court, and I remember getting into the car and putting on the radio, and I remember absolutely LBC reporting there was some disturbance going on in Woolwich. I phoned through to our command and control centre, and I tried to make out what was going on, and it is confusing, and there was like different reports coming in as to a sword attack, a machete attack, almost like gang violence. It was very confused at that stage, so didn't really know what was going on. But what transpired after a very short time was absolutely this had been a terrorist killing, it had been an attack on a serving soldier, and the event I'm talking about was Lee Rigby in Woolwich. I was asked to take command of the community side of things following that, because you can imagine that was the first type of killing in recent modern times that we've had on UK soil. You can imagine the backlash that the Muslim community feared and got. And you can imagine the upset that other communities, including our Jewish community, were feeling at that time. So it was a complicated, it was a disturbing, and it was a very unsettling time for all of us at every level, including senior leaders within politics and services. But as the afternoon went on, and we began to get more information, and as I was dealing with the community side of things, I was picking up murmurs, I was picking up sentiment that actually, these two who were potentially involved and we didn't really know who they were, actually they, in terms of their behaviour, changes had started to take place. They were displaying different changes in their behaviour, and this was just before the attack, in weeks before the attack. So I began to think, well, actually, such behaviour by local people happened in a local neighbourhood. So this was a terrorist plot. It was inspired, I think, in somebody's neighbourhood. It must have been. It was executed in somebody's neighbourhood. On this occasion, it was the neighbourhood of Woolwich, and somebody was harmed in the neighbourhood. So I started to think that, irrespective of sometimes our global consciousness of terrorism, we think it's a big grand thing on a global scale, which it probably is, but absolutely it's a local problem. It's hatched in a local neighbourhood, it's plotted in a local neighbourhood, it absolutely kills and maims in local neighbourhoods. So 9/11, the neighbourhood of Manhattan, the Twin Towers, 7/7, our tube and train stations, Woolwich in somebody's neighbourhood. So that, together with actually some people may have seen some signs of change in behaviour, those taken together, localism and local people being able to spot such signs, absolutely had a bit of a chilling effect on me, thinking, could we have done something to prevent this? And if not, can we take the lessons out of this? Can we do something to prevent the next mass killing, maiming through a terrorist atrocity? So, bringing the focus back onto Muslim communities, I start to wonder what Muslim communities, their understanding, their involvement, their participation is in this arena. And trust and confidence really counts in the work that I do, and I had an existing background of trust and confidence with the London Muslim Communities Forum. Some of them who may be in this room a bit later today, they're praying for 2 o'clock prayers on a Friday. And I decided to ask them a question. I said, if you accept that terrorism, all acts of terrorism starts and finishes in neighbourhoods, then why can't Muslim communities do more to tackle radicalisation and extremism? And that wasn't a challenging question. It wasn't me being brave or just out there. I was absolutely thinking, well, why can't we? Because actually the harm that's perpetrated comes from Muslim communities in the majority, just speaking in a general sense, and it doesn't discriminate. Muslims are not in any way immune from some harm. In fact, in many parts of the world, they're people being harmed the most. So I asked the question. And they came back to me after 3 months in August, 7,000 words later, with their answer, which is this answer, and it's available on the website. I think it's a really good read. They thought about it. It wasn't as if, how dare you ask us this question, and it's not our fault. It wasn't any of that. It was an absolute drive to try and understand exactly what we can all do to keep each other safe. And at the heart of their answer was a simple message, and it's in the heart of this document. Actually, Muslim communities can do more, but they don't really know how to. And that immediately sparked, actually, what can we do? What can I do to try and bridge and develop that gap? So what I'm going to talk about today is actually some of the practical, simple steps that I think Muslim communities in particular can take. And before I start to award myself too much credit, I've picked up all the ideas from Muslim communities themselves. It's not my thinking; it's their thinking. I just have the liberty of being able to bring them together and collectively present them. After I do that, before you think, actually, that's it, we've got the solutions, before we get too carried away, I'm also going to talk about, well, actually, any solution has to fit within a world environment. And I'll talk about, actually, the complexity of the environment in which we're living in, and this so-called think about the crisis of identity, and this will be my interpretation of the identity of crisis of British Muslims. So after I smooth that bit out, and we've got some solutions before you still don't get carried away, in terms of job done, it's not. There's some very hostile impediments out there which I think seek to undermine some of the progress that we all as good citizens try to make from time to time. Now, following that, what I'll do is I'll just finish off with a small set of recommendations which I think are short, sharp, to the point, which I think we all need to perhaps consider as addressing this global phenomena which harms and threatens and terrorises us all. So with your permission, if I may continue with what I think some of the answers may be. And again, these have been taken from Muslim communities themselves, so it's not necessarily my thinking that I'm presenting. So, whilst the words not represent the feeling of what I'm going to say, I think they do encapsulate the theory. This thing about self-regulation. This is where Muslim communities come together and they regulate their own behaviour, their own code of standards, their own quality assurance programmes, to absolutely bring in what they think is necessary and right for their communities, and a governance process which absolutely understands and governs their own communities. So, for example, within mosques, the appointment of imams, to what qualification, to what background, to what expectation they would want their imams to be qualified to, so they can be sure within that community of the message going out in the right tone and vein that they expect. Madrasas, which are teaching schools for most junior Muslim people, and ready-made networks of people and ready-made outlets for us to be able to engage with. But in terms of madrasas, the lessons, the lesson plans, the quality, again, to what standard, to what aim are we trying to achieve? Apart from teaching the Holy Quran in Arabic, is there going to be a set of explanation notes as well that actually describes the content, the context, the history, the environment? So you take the Quran in a contextual way that it's meant to be, so people understand what the Quran is about, so you don't get confused later on when somebody just espouses Arabic language to you and you're a little bit fearful of challenging it back in case you disrespect the holy book. Training for mosques, mosque staff, the mosque environment, so that the persona of that local environment is something that is conducive to the environment within that neighbourhood. So it absolutely matches. It's not out of context, so you're able to relate to that local community in a way with a language that matters and resonates. Across the Islamic world, in terms of mosques, a message is the best way to get messages across is if you keep saying it, and once you stop doing it, you say it over and over again, and that's the way good visions stick and values grow. So in terms of Friday sermons, instead of having disparate sermons, which are all good in their very nature, if we collectively came together and said, this week we are going to talk about whatever, and we kept talking about that, then I think the message would get home. And indeed, just recent example, a lot of that took place after the atrocious killing of Assad Shah in Glasgow, where mosques came in and absolutely made it certain that sectarian violence, hatred had no place in the UK, or indeed in the Holy Quran or in the religion of Islam. And that was done. But you do it week one, it may not land. Week two, you might have a different audience. And my message here is we have to keep on repeating our values, our sentiments, so it absolutely sticks and gets home. Charitable causes, I mean, many Muslim people are very philanthropic, very, very charitable. It's part of our religion to support charities. But just come together as a collective body to design and identify what charities are going to be supported. Anything from supporting the refugees from Syria to Dr. Bernardo's, wherever they be. As a community, we decide on what charities we're going to support and what causes we're going to go for. It also eliminates the charity box collections outside. Half the time you don't know who they represent, where the money's going to go to, and it absolutely, as a community, squeezes the opportunity for funds to be misused, because you stay within a legitimate body, and that also grows reputation. Community service surgeries and workshops to help communities with community problems to grow their own capability of problem solving, so they can reach into services and develop and try and harness some social mobility, lifting them out of their own areas or their own situations to help progress with them. Now, all fine words, and you've heard all this before, but many people might turn around and say it's never going to be possible. Well, it is possible, and it is happening, and I'll give you some examples. The Al-Khoi Foundation, they produce some wonderful advice. I work with them very closely, and they've got 10 simple bullet points on one piece of paper advising staff and communities within schools on how to deal with sectarian bullying. They've also got a 2-page document on how to address extreme media in the face of hostility and how to manage those messages within the community, but how to deal with that through the formal channels as well. You've got the Dialogue Society, which from the other side of the world, in our case from North London near Tottenham, you've got the Dialogue Society, which have produced and written out absolutely everything in template form, which can be used and does get used by other denominations of Muslim communities, such as how to hold a community meeting. What does a mosque open day look like? What does a letter of invitation? All templated, all put together, all nicely packaged there and existing, and we just need to use it. In fact, I'm aware that the open day, the mosque open day, that was orchestrated across the country a few weeks ago by the Muslim Council of Britain. They actually used the literature from Dialogue Society, and what a good example of communities working together to bring a set standard for everyone. More recently, the announcement and the launch of the Salam Forum. This took place at Scotland Yard yesterday. It was a multi-denominational gathering of all Muslims from faith groups, from civic society, and from the political arena coming together to present a very strong symbol of unity and defiance against those that try and divide on sectarian grounds. And some very powerful messages were made yesterday, both from the MP from Glasgow and from the MP in Bradford. Both Naz and her colleagues came together, made some messages to make sure that it was well understood that the Muslim community does not stand for divide. Because at the moment, as I speak, there's literature on my desk, which I'm having examined at the moment, which is going around parts of London, which does say, actually, if you're an Ahmadi, you haven't got any entitlements, and what Muslim duty should be, and it's just a bit more than hatred. So it does occur, but when you get a body of people like the Islam Forum standing together and saying, not us, you suddenly realise that's marginalised, and the body of Muslim communities, it also helps to influence minds, younger minds as well. Because sometimes what's written, what comes in formal print, what's on TV, can get misinterpreted as actually the the word that matters, and it's not always the case. I think just moving on to the other things we should do. On a personal note, this violates me as a Muslim, annoys me because it's done easily without any thought or care or respect. This is about the misinterpretation of Quranic verses. And although a rebuttal takes place, it doesn't take place on a scale or in a place that absolutely smashes those ridiculous endeavours to misinterpret the Quran, which is sacrilegious to me. So, for example, in the Holy Quran, it does say on 3 occasions, wherever you find them, you kill them. But people need to realise that it's the contextual interpretation, not the literal interpretation, that absolutely matters. So that was another time when the Holy Prophet had been in Medina. It was at a time when the Muslims, newly found Muslims, were under persecution. A number of peace treaties had been broken. They were under active attack, and that order was given when Muslims at that time were in the height of battle, in the height of battle, on the battlefield itself. So that's what that pertains to. It doesn't pertain to everyday life where a non-believer should be killed. That's preposterous, but that's what it's been presented as by some extremist groups. You must also understand that actually violence wasn't a part of the religion. Yes, there were 9 battles over 8 years in the Prophet's time. They're all a defensive form of jihad. In that time, 1,500 people lost their lives. Only 1 woman did, and only 1 elderly person did. And the battles in totality did not last for more than 13 hours over those 9 years. So it wasn't a religion, although it was a spreading religion, it was gaining momentum. It wasn't done through, as some people may have you believe, through violence and through force. The other thing I think Muslim communities can do, including me, is to undermine the conspiracy theories that lie around. As hideous as they are, they end up being attractive and sticking with equal measure. So, again, my job is to try and lead London through some difficult times, just like Charlie Hebdo, just like Paris in November, and just like Belgium a couple of weeks ago. As I was leading that response, I was also picking up messages and sentiments from the streets that the conspiracy theory on this occasion within minutes was this was not a terrorist attack. It was perpetrated and carried out by the European police, whoever they may or may not be, in order to dissuade countries from offering support to refugees. And again, I'll tell you that's hideous. I was in Belgium the week before when there was a arrest made. It was a tense environment then. It must have been worse, much, much worse, when the bombs went off. So, on a personal level, I kind of relate to it. And what does annoy me when people just willy-nilly come out with those and nobody seems to be countering it with the full force that it deserves to be countered with. Lack of understanding also divides us, completely divides us. So, where some Muslims boycott some products or some outlets in mistaken belief, so they will shun things like Marks and Spencer's, Starbucks, Nestle, Danone, Nando's. Can't quite believe that one, but they do. In the mistaken belief that they're Israeli institutions, and they're not. And they will do this with some sort of fever that drives them and compels them to think that this is their Islamic responsibility. A, they're misguided. B, doesn't count for that. And certainly C, it's not an Islamic responsibility. But what that does do, it does so divide when you should be appreciating difference. And when integration, it's so central to communities staying together, that starts to sow segregation, and that's not acceptable in my book. Last couple of things on things that I think we should do. It's the thing about affinity. We have an affinity to one another through race, through language, through background, through history, through all of those things. But I think the most obvious one that sometimes is overlooked, that the one that we can all immediately relate to, is affinity of locality, your neighbourhood. This is where me and my family live. This is where you and your family lives. And I can find nobody who wants a bad neighbourhood, who wants overgrown bushes, graffiti, discarded drug paraphernalia, broken windows. I haven't come across anybody who wants that. Everybody wants quite a nice neighbourhood. And when something happens in your own neighbourhood, that's personal. So if people forget their affinity just based on race, colour, belief, and get around that this is where we live, we have a common purpose, we are good people, we can become good neighbours and look out for one another, I think that will also help to grow an integrated approach to community cohesion, which I think is central to us remaining strong and becoming more socially resilient to all sorts of harms, including radicalisation, including grooming, child sexual exploitation, bullying, the whole thing. So those are some of the practical things that I think that can and should be done, and indeed are being done, but not in a joined up way. But it's easy to say all of that, but the conditions of the world must allow for things to fit and be accepted. And I hear a lot about the identity crisis of British Muslim people, and I've tried to understand what that means. I've not tried to understand it through books, although that's a good starting point. I've tried to reflect on my own experience, my own conversations, and my own engagement with Muslims of all backgrounds, from all parts of the world, with all different languages, who make all sorts of different wonderful foods, and they invite me to. The opportunity to just break bread and talk to them. And what I've understood from this is actually there's three types really. There's the type that my parents come from, maybe the first generation, who cling on to their heritage in fear of going into the unknown, something new, and losing what they were used to from back home. There's the next generation that I think is slightly confused. Some of them try to replicate their parents without having that lived-in experience, and therefore perpetuate the same type of living culture and social framework that doesn't perhaps necessarily fit within their own world, so it causes an uneasy truce. So people who aren't used to how life was lived in the 50s or 60s in places like Pakistan, India or Bangladesh are living that lifestyle here through just replication. So things like arranged marriage, things like forced marriage, things like business within the family environment, the fraternity, things like bladri, this thing about close family, is perpetuated and strengthened and exists. And none of that closeness in terms of fraternity is bad, but I do think it reduces the opportunity of space to grow and learn and develop, so you don't move very far and you remain stuck in a time frame where you're losing opportunities around the world, across your world environment that may help you. And on a personal note, I've reflected on that quite a bit. And sadly, my own mother passed away a couple of years ago. And I just think, actually, had she just broken away from some of her heritage and her lifestyle, and she had not conformed to what she was used to, and just got into healthy juices or shakes or better diet, it may have meant that she may have had a couple more years to live. And that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. I'm not talking about necessarily security, I'm just talking about as a people growing and becoming and having better life chances, socially and in terms of life, in terms of length. The other thing that we do is talking about the neighbourhood model again. This is the last point I'll make on this point about. The other point I was going to make is, so you've got the two types. You've got my parents' type who cling on to their heritage, another type where they try and replicate their parents, and then you get within that another sect which go two ways, I think. There's one way where they completely reject the culture of their parents. They don't relate to it, they don't acknowledge it, and they reject it, feeling they have to make a choice one way or the other, which isn't comfortable and isn't neither necessary, because I think diversity includes having to be able to mix and take the best from all worlds. Or you get another type which is emerging, which completely reject the first form of their parents, and in terms of religious, find identity within religion, and try and find a religious identity which they feel is more pristine and more authentic than their parents, challenging their parents back. And I do see this where children have grown up and they've gone back and they've questioned their parents' practice of Islam, saying that's not the way you do it. and their parents have probably been educated through a way that's been taught by word of mouth and unable to respond in a academic, informed way, and then that arises tensions. And I've experienced that myself, where I've been at a family gathering and we are normal liberal Sufis, and a wedding was going on, and suddenly I noticed that actually photographs weren't being taken. It was like, you can't take photographs. I said, when did that happen in our family environment? It was like second removed cousins, but nevertheless, it was a shock to me, thinking, there's something going on here that's changing how we live. And you see some of that. You see a lot more presence of hijabs and Islamic dress around. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Personal choice, and I regard that as a personal matter. Respect the right to do that. But what I'm saying is, it does represent some change, and we just need to understand why that change is there, and how we can integrate such change. So that's the world environment in which we live. We've just gone through some things that we can do. But even if we smooth out the world environment and say, actually, we're just going to be happy, we're going to accept some stuff and work together as one community, and even if we get some really, really good solutions, I think there's some places in the margins where there's voices and organisation exists that absolutely deter you or prevent you or disrupt you from doing that. And I did an article in a national paper last year about this time, and the point I was making was actually, signs and symbols of change that occur can be so discreet, can be so subtle, that only your first degree associates, your family, your parents, your brothers and sisters can spot those changes. Even if you allowed me as an officer enter into your house and had the authority, I would not know if there's something different. I just would not know it. And I relate this to my first point about Lee Rigby's murder, where some changes, that community were able to say this changes took place. And what I was talking about is, within that private space, increase your vigilance. So you can become more engaged. You can engage earlier. You can understand if change is taking place. And you can understand the reasons behind that change. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be innocent. But one time, it's not. The earlier you engage, the earlier you can do something about it, the better prospects you have of bringing some balance, as opposed to people going off, harming themselves and others. And then there'll be less potential for parents and families to be grieving, saying, we had no idea what was going on. So I made those statements then, and it was an article that talked about private space intervention. Yes, a bit formality of words, but the sentiment I've just explained. And suddenly I had a whole group of people on my back saying, actually, I was anti-Islamic, they're mimicking me, they're putting pictures of me within McDonald's, because I was saying that if you go to McDonald's, that you're no longer Islamic. All sorts of preposterous things, where the heart of my message was active safeguarding. That's all I meant, and that's all I explained. And one of the things I do believe in, and I'll come on to it later, is actually, if you're going to deal with the problem, you deal with all of it, including all the ugly bits. And within my article, I did speak about Marks and Spencer's, because otherwise I'd be shirking away from my own responsibility. Because certain things that people do want to talk about that other people shy away from, I think we have to talk about all of it if we're going to deal with the problem. But I'll come on to that in a short while. The other thing that I think is an impediment as well is actually this reverence and the ultimate respect for the Holy Quran and the religion of Islam, and I think that's great and noble. I think we should stick to that. But Islam also encourages inquiry, also encourages questions, and I've been brought up thinking, actually, I'll just accept a lot of what I'm told, because I don't know any better, and for me to question it may somehow be disrespectful. So I've not wanted to do that. But I just think we should become more empowered. Not to become un-Islamic, that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is actually just understand why certain things in Islam were said, so you can make your own mind up. By doing that, you build the capacity and resilience, and less amenable to some of the more charismatic preachers of hate who might try and just entice you. I think the last point as well, where sometimes communities live life but don't really take note of the reality of what's going on. So the United Kingdom threat assessment stands at severe. That means an attack is highly likely. I can't say that your neighbourhood, my neighbourhood is immune. I can't say it's not being plotted in your neighbourhood and my neighbourhood. And I do think that actually the way conventional terrorism was policed. It's different, it's viral, it's an idea, it's ideological, it gets into your heart, it can operate, and it can entice lone actors, so the threat can be everywhere. And to counter that threat, I think we all have to stand up as citizens, as people, as neighbours, and be actively vigilant with eyes and ears, and have trusting relationships with the police and with other bodies, so we can fortify ourselves in the best way we can. So just to finish off, if I may, and I touched upon this a little while ago, it's no good dealing with the problem, but just parts of the problem where we are comfortable with. We have to deal with all of it. We have to encourage debate. We have to have the space to allow people to express how they're really feeling. And if that means talking about and being critical of British foreign policy, I'd rather have that on the table than somebody trying to plot something against us. So let's have this space. Let's talk about Gaza. Let's talk about Israel. Let's talk about Palestine. Let's correct a lot of the misunderstanding. So when I was interviewed by the reporter for a national article last year, it was deliberate, where he said, well, tell me about Marks and Spencer's. Should Muslims shop at Marks and Spencer's? And I was left with a clear choice then. I think, but I'm experienced and skilled enough to be able to easily just dodge my way out of that question. But I chose not to. Because I believe in, actually, we're going to deal with the problem, we'll talk about it. Let's talk about Marks and Spencer's. It's your right if you don't want to shop there. If you might not like the service, you might not like the quality, you may not just like the way it looks. That's fine. But if you stop shopping there, and my point was, and it's out of character, and suddenly you start to investigate why you're there, and it's a mistaken belief, it's Israeli or it's connected with somebody, I just might want to have a look at, well, who's giving you those messages? Just to intervene at an early point to say, actually, son, daughter, cousin, loved one, friend, do you really understand what you're doing? That was my point. So when these fringe groups presented that as Mak Chishty, commander, most senior Muslim police officer, says if you shop at Marks and Spencer's, you're a terrorist, how ridiculous was that? Yeah. And they talked about Marks and Spencer's, and they put my face within a Mac burger. I thought sales might increase, but unfortunately never. A new paradigm. My next point was new paradigm. We've got to break out of this thing. Muslim communities, and you'll see it in the report if you do read it, if you're interested in it. They're too happy. They report themselves. They're too happy to leave matters of security and safety to the state. And what I'm saying now is the world has changed. You could catch a burglar with, or stop a burglary happening with, an alarm, a padlock, some bars. But when the threat is coming through wires, and now wireless, through Bluetooth, in your pocket, on your mobile data device, and it's getting into your passion because it's Islam, it's religion, it's your belief. And if they make you believe that the ultimate act of devotion and instant paradise for you and 7 generations of your family is by sacrificing yourself for the Almighty, and do it in this way and taking out infidels, you are suddenly a martyr. I mean, just that sounded a little bit powerful, but you get the point. But you do that against wailing women, Quranic voices and verses being done in the background of a video where they're showing the Middle East, and they are saying, where are our men? Our women are being raped, our land is being stolen, we are being raped and pillaged, and where are our men? Our men, come and save us. And suddenly you get somebody who's slightly vulnerable, doesn't know Islam, wanting to help fellow mankind and fellow Muslim ummah. It doesn't take much to see how that can just change, unless there's a steadying factor. And change can happen quite quickly. So what I'm saying is a paradigm shift where wake up, shake up, have a look at what the real threats are, and let's counter them. I think this thing about active safeguarding as well, where we can walk past, and Islam doesn't teach this, where people are coming across with ludicrous ideologies and remarks, whether the Israelis are perpetuating an attack, whether it's 9/11 or something, and you kind of just walk past it and think, silly, let's stop, let's not walk past, let's counter it, let's just deal with it, because that develops into some things much more sinister and into harms much worse than just conversations. Let's just tackle it, let's be empowered, let's be encouraged. We owe it to one another to stop those things from flourishing. And my last point, and you might expect me to say this as the commander in charge of trust and confidence, we need to build trust and confidence amongst all communities. Yes, please trust me. Have confidence in my ability. We do, because the police are the public. The public are the police. That is not new, that is old. You are we are you, and we need to be as one. We desperately need to be as one to fight this global menace that's absolutely pervading all spaces, across all environments, across the universe at this moment in time, and be as one person with different religions, but we all have the same values. You call them Islamic values, which are no different to British values, which are no different from human values, whatever. We want peace, tolerance, safety, security and respect. Thank you very much.